We are live. It's all good. All right. So I'll bring that screen off right at noon, and we'll start.
Nice. Is what we're saying being broadcasted?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. So, and we'll get. I have a little eye here that tells me if people join in, and if they want to ask questions or something, we can do that too. But as I say, you never know. No. We got about 2 minutes.
Let me go open a door for somebody. Just 1 minute. Is that okay? Sure.
Okay. Probably got a few more seconds here.
Okay.
All right, we're going to go live. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and good afternoon, Father Pepe Ruiz. My name is Steve Gibbons. I am the Executive Director of the Bridges Foundation here in St. Louis. We offer an experience of the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius Loyola in everyday life. We'll be talking about that a little more throughout the program here. But today we are joined by Father Pepe Ruiz, who I'll let him introduce himself a little more, but I will say that he is a Jesuit priest. He's on staff at the Montserrat Retreat House in Dallas, Texas. And he's actually in St. Louis today giving a retreat at the White House retreat. He'll be back in St. Louis in July, offering a program for friends and community members of the Bridges Foundation. So it's our summer, we call it our Ignatian Spirituality Retreat. And the retreat this year will be held July 19th and 20th at the Sisters of St. Joseph Mother House in the Carondelet neighborhood. He'll be speaking on freedom to live in love, getting rid of disordered affections in order to seek and find God's will for our lives. And we'll be talking about that today during our conversation. So, good afternoon, Pepe. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm doing great. I just arrived here in St. Louis for this retreat, and yesterday was very, crazy weather, but today is beautiful. So grateful for that.
And you told me earlier you spent some time in St. Louis over the years during your formation. Right?
That's right. Yeah. So my philosophy, I did it here at St. Louis University. Love that time. And then I've worked at St. Louis University High School. After ordination, I was sent here for a year, and I feel like at another point I also did that. But yeah, so it's been, I love it here.
Good, nice. Let's kind of start as we always do on these conversations. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, your upbringing, your family and your faith as a child growing up, and how that all kind of evolved into a life as a Jesuit priest and a life in so deeply uh, ensconced in Ignatian spirituality. So just tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so I'm originally from a border city, the border with El Paso, Texas, and on the other side, that's where I was born in Ciudad Juarez, and that's the border with El Paso. So the growing up, it's kind of the genesis of Ignatian spirituality for my faith journey had to do with my parents. They met at an Ignatian spirituality type retreat that there were this priests of the Holy Spirit. But anyways, they put together a retreat where it was basically the first week of the exercises almost straight up, and that's kind of how they met. Growing up, I remember seeing my dad later got connected with a spiritual director, and he was very involved in ministry himself. So I just remember kind of that when we went to this priest that was a Jesuit, I was in El Paso, it was almost like, this is not like the others. And it was more like realizing like the kind of preaching, there was something different. And I think I wasn't, it took me a while to distinguish what was this priest personality and what was Ignatian spirituality. But the more time went on, now as time has gone on, the more I realized, I was being enamored by Ignatian spirituality. All the talk about discernment, like he could talk about God's will, is like, oh my God, that's such a like, big topic. And so I remember my dad, for example, the practice of spiritual direction, seeing it in action from the other side, because things were really tough sometimes. My dad would go talk to this priest, and somehow, he'd come back and God was more part of the picture. Things were a little bit more at peace. And so it was my kind of growing up, kind of seeing that. I think as I started maturing, that became a question for me of kind of my vocation. And at some point, I just decided I wanted to make a retreat, and I did it with this priest. I had taken retreats for discernment. So I studied with the Marists brothers in Juarez. And so I took a retreat with them. I felt like I was very young at the time. And I even told that to God. I feel like I told him something like, Lord, if you're calling me, I think you're going to have to wait. Because I haven't had a job, haven't had a girlfriend. It's like life things that, that I felt like I wanted to be able to choose between things that I knew. So later on, I did this other retreat that was during Holy Week. I did a week retreat with this Jesuit priest. And I just remember it was a very important retreat. And even though I didn't get any clarity as to enter or not to enter, it was more like a calling to really get serious about the discernment. And I think it just began a process. So by the time I joined, I was halfway through an industrial engineering degree. And it was like a double major, industrial engineering and business. And I just kind of realized, that it was time, that I felt like it was tough. I made my discernment, went back to school, to university, after I knew I wanted to be, a Jesuit, a priest. And so I went back, and it's almost like the engineering piece, what kept me going was thinking about doing this stuff. So then I wasn't thinking I was going to do the stuff. So I decided like, this is no longer giving me life to study this. So I just decided to join the Jesuits and see if everything would transfer, and it did. So yeah, I ended up transferring everything later and joined the novitiate in Gran Catal. which is when it was the UCS province. So I mean the New Orleans province before we became one. Yeah, and a bit of that journey. Like I said, Ignatian spirituality was a big part of like why I joined the Jesuits. I really love the spirituality. I love our ministries as well. And as time went on, like a lot of people would go, like during the summers, English speakers would go and learn Spanish, and I already knew Spanish, so I started taking all the summers. I try to get like a spiritual direction internship wherever I could. And so I went to like as many as I could find and try to give retreats as much as I could. Before joining, I was also giving retreats. Almost a third of my weekends, I was giving retreats, kind of like Ignatian style for people my age. So I had given about, it was under 300 because I started when I was 14 years old to when I joined. But so I just kept doing that and looking for the spiritual direction internships. And then I went to Boston College for theology in the Journey of Formation. And I got there like a master's in divinity, which is kind of like all the basics and some a year of theology. And after that, there was an opportunity of getting another master's, a master's in theology base where I could focus on spiritual direction. And me and another Jesuit, we kind of put together, it was a coincidence of several things, but Bill Berry was at that time kind of retired, and he was my spiritual director during that time. And a couple of Jesuits, we asked him if he could come out of retirement for one last class, you know. And he did it, and it was great. It coincided that Philip and Dean was also visiting Boston College during that time. Was also is a big author in Ignatian spirituality, and I took several classes with him. And so, anyways, I was able to put together kind of this master's with the extras that they give you, and was focused on spiritual direction. That was wonderful. And then I thought I was done studying, and the provincial at the time was Ron, and I really was enjoying, really loving my studies all throughout, and doing pretty well. And my provincial asked me if I could take a third master's, if I would enjoy a third master's in Ignatian spirituality. I didn't know that existed. And when I found that out, I was like, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. What I've been trying. And that was in Spain, and in Comillas. And that was, the most consoling, one of the most wonderful experiences. And I learned so much. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah, thanks for that introduction. It's so as I mentioned earlier, you're going to be back in St. Louis this summer for this Bridges event. We actually hold this every other year. It's called the Ignatian Community Retreat. If anyone is interested after listening to this, just check out our website. There's information on the website, or there will be very soon, actually. And but let's talk a little bit about this retreat and its theme, freedom to live in love. And let's just talk a little bit about what that means. What does it mean to have the freedom to live in love? And what does the opposite of that look like? What's the opposite of the freedom to live in love?
Yeah. So the opposite, I think, is a very common experience, that we want to love the people around us. We want to live a life of according to kind of the purpose of our lives, connecting to God, connecting to others. And yet we find ourselves that a lot of times the people we end up hurting the most are the people closest to us. The people that we end up having the hardest time are the people that we really, at a deepest core, is the people we wanted to love the most. And so we kind of like this realization that we all have at some point in our lives, that like, what is it that I can't relish this beautiful relationship that I have? Why? And, you know, and a lot of times we end up, thinking it's the fault of the other person, or thinking there's all kinds of things that we might be thinking, but in the end we realize, like, I want to love. I wish life was easier. Why can't I do it? And I think one of the insights from St. Ignatius is that it's not necessarily other people, it's not necessarily the world, but something within my heart, that I could live this life with love, with peace, with joy, regardless of all kinds of messes in the world and in other people. And the difficulty in doing that is that sometimes, even though, like, I have good intentions and I really am trying, I'm putting other things first. So I'm saying, I want to love you, but you should be this way for me to love you. And so we confuse the ends and the means. If the end of our life has to do with love, with God, who is love, we sometimes say, like, but before I can love you, you have to do this and this and that. So we're putting that first. So the means, or sometimes, like, before I can love, I need to have money. So I'm going to put my family in pause and go work, and it's kind of like Stephen Covey was a guy who was kind of like a business, famous personality, and wrote books and all. He worked with a lot of businessmen, and he would say a lot of men realize in their deathbed that nobody cared how much time they spent in the office. Yeah. And that's, like, a lot of times the sad situation. So we just kind of like, why does that happen? Well, a lot of times because we're pursuing other ends without realizing what was the truly important thing that we wanted to get. And a lot of times it has to do with love, in my mind. So.
So how do we get to this freedom, and what does that freedom look like?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing, like, how can we define freedom? Yeah. And we could probably say something like the capacity to live without being determined by disaffections that move us away from the goal of our life. Ignatius kind of puts it like that. Like the very beginning, paragraph 24, I think, like right as, like, when he's starting the core of the exercise, says spiritual exercises to gain freedom, so we are not determined by disordered affections. Yeah. So, like, and when Ignatius talks about kind of the purpose of the spiritual exercises, basically it's at the core of this kind of the freedom to live in love. Ignatius says that the purpose of the exercises is twofold. He says is, first, to get rid of disordered affections, and second, so that we can seek and find God's will for our lives. So those two kind of was what I was trying to get at with the title. So how to do that, I think, is like ultimately that's kind of the goal of the exercises. So describing how to do that is almost describing how the spiritual exercises work. So we could talk a little bit about that. So I guess there's different kind of approaches on how to do it. The first thing is, one of the things that I think spirituality has always helped, human beings in achieving this, is how to think about our lives with some distance from the everyday experience, and to think about what's the ultimate purpose of my life. So, like, all this striving, all of my tiredness in my work and everything I'm doing, where is it? Where is the whole thing going? Yeah. And Ignatius begins there with the purpose of life and the principle and foundation. He says, the purpose of our lives is to live in love. That's one way, kind of Fleming summarizes it, but is to praise, reverence, and serve God. And these are three attitudes of relationship, of good relationships. Praise, reverence, and serve God. So to live in love with this loving God. So when you think of purpose, it has to do with where am I going? If I'm going to the store, what's my purpose to go to the store? It's like, well, I'm going to get this particular thing, come back. So when I think about the longer purpose of my life, it's like, where is this whole thing heading to? So the purpose of life has to do with, where am I going to end up? And for Christians, we do believe it has to do with, we're going to end up in God. We're created for God, and God is love. Yeah. And of course, it has an impact in our relationships because you can't say, I love God and I hate my brother. So this idea of living in love is almost like living according to the way God, wants us to live. Yeah. But so the how, the first thing is to think about our lives in that way. Where is everything going? The other thing is to realize, I want to go here, I'm here, and everything else is the means, the road, right? So the means is the money, the means is my health, the means is, my relationships. Like everything has to do, they're all means. And Ignatius, when he would talk about the principle and foundation, we read this in the directories where he kind of tells other Jesuits how he talked about the exercises. In the directories, he says that he thinks about the principle and foundation in 3 points. He says, the first is, what is the end, the purpose of my life, which we said. The second one is, what are the means, which is basically everything else, a long life or a short life, a lot of money or not, all the other. And the third, he said, is the difficulty. It's kind of the pickle we find ourselves in, is that we confuse the ends and the means, basically. That I say I want to live in love, I say I want to be happy, which if I get, but then I really focus on really just the money, or just getting the health thing, or like I focus on a lot of things that are not the end in itself, they're means. So when I have God in the center, all of these other elements kind of find balance and they have the proper place in my life. But if I'm seeking just the one, somehow that has the capacity to break all the others. And that's, so part of how is like recognizing what things am I turning into ends when there should be means. I can hold them more lightly if I see them like that. Other ways is basically realizing, how do I work on my freedom? So sometimes in order for me to let go of these things, of making them so central for my happiness, I need to heal. A lot of times it's a story in my life. If I experienced a lot of neglect, maybe that's why I'm putting that first, because without that sense of security, I can't feel, like I can love others. So sometimes we need to heal that, And there's different ways. Ignatius talks about, also, we also need to have a little process of discovery of our own. And there's different methods Ignatius has in the exercises on how do I discover what are the things that I'm holding too tight, that I can't let go. So it's a process of discovery, it's a process of healing. And then ultimately, it's easier to let it go when I'm more aware of why I'm holding it, and that God can help me, have that safety, for example, have that feel loved, accepted, respected. Then I can let go of this other thing that I thought was going to make me feel that, if I can get it from God. So,
and some of these things are, they're not necessarily that we're choosing to do bad things as much as sometimes, right? These are the things that are kind of we've either been raised with, our
Hmm.
parents, our family teaches us, or they're even a little bit hardwired into us. This is just the way we are. And so how do we begin to shed some of those old tapes, so to speak, and become more in touch with a truer source of freedom? I know that's probably a question for the entire retreat, but do you want to talk about that a
No.
little bit? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I feel like that's exactly one of the um, one of the meditations that Ignatius proposes that I'm thinking of using this retreat is precisely like that.
Mm.
How do I uncover like the source of where I got this approach to life, this disorder? And so he says he helps us really start from the general in our lives and seeing not even just my family of origin, like look at the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like uh, he says, first look at kind of the sin of the angels. What's the sin of the angels? He says, well, it's pride. And he says, look at the world and see in the world if there's something of pride right now. And so if you do that exercise, you realize, are people prideful? And you look at like geopolitics, world. Yeah, like
Mm.
almost every war has to do with some sense of pride, in a negative way. Um, and then you go a little closer, and like, I wonder if that happens also, in my family. And you see, like, are people, behaving in a way that they need to raise themselves up? Yeah, yeah. And then you keep going, like, I wonder if that happens in my nuclear family. And then you wonder, like, I wonder if I act like that sometimes. And you're like, maybe. So but it's like, it also gives you a sense of like, okay, I'm also not the only one struggling with this. I'm drinking from this well that is the world. And I'm like part of this. I inherited this. Everybody thinks that this is how we're going to be happy.
Mm.
And it's almost like opening the eyes to seeing like this is everywhere.
Mm.
And then just the second thing he says, then you look at how things are contagious, not just that people are prideful, but how it passes on. And you see that, is it contagious? One country is acting this way and the other one starts acting that way. Yeah. In our jobs, it's a prideful boss, and then everybody else starts acting prideful. Yeah. In my family, did I receive, like what you were saying, did I receive all these attitudes? Yeah. And
Mm.
probably my grandparents did it. And then do I do it? And I'm like, oof, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you finally look at the consequences, and you say, like, are the bad consequences all around? And you say, like, well, yeah.
Yeah.
And just like that process of digging that in your own life is also like an awareness of, okay, well, I didn't come up with all this disorder on my own.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I'm swimming in it, but the first part is like to have enough curiosity to discover that, to see that everywhere and to see it in me.
Yeah.
So
We're running about near the end, but I thought two things. One is that there's a few people watching right now. If any of you have any questions for Father Pepe you'd like to throw out, please you can do that right there in the comment section of Facebook. I'll see it if you do. Let's so we me mention one more time. You're going to be back in St. Louis in July for this Ignatian Community Retreat, covering a lot of the topics that we've just been discussing. What might people expect from this retreat? How's it going to be? What's the format? And yeah, what might they expect?
yeah. So the first thing is that I don't think my role is to be kind of like a wisdom figure that people can drink from, but more, I see myself more as kind of, Ignatius says that when he describes the role of the spiritual director, he says, is to give order and modo y orden, order and structure
Mm.
to the spiritual experience, and to place a creature with the creator. So that my role, I think, more is like to say, here's this idea of what you can think about, and go pray and talk to Jesus about this and see what comes up. So the way we're dividing the day is that I give some points, but it's more of an invitation for you to go and then do some digging of your own in your own life, to make some connections of your own. So I'll talk about stuff and give you some instructions, basically, so that you go and do the work yourself. So I see the more important pieces happening not when I'm speaking, but almost when I'm not, when you're going on your own. And basically, I see myself as saying, here's God's hand, is your hand. You go hold each other and talk. And in those conversations, I think that's where the meat of the retreat will probably be happening. Yeah.
That's great. And again, we're going to be at the Sisters of St. Joseph Mother House, which is a historic, beautiful historic building with a gorgeous chapel and some great garden areas. It's kind of in the middle of the city, so it's not walking trails and things like that. But there's plenty of places, either inside and out, to kind of get quiet and do some of this reflection that Father Pepe is talking about. So I hope you'll consider joining us. Again, you can check out our website for more information, or a way to reach out and talk to me. The information on the July retreat will be up there very shortly, if it's not right there yet. But in any case, please keep this in mind. Mark your calendars if you'd like to join us. It's just a Friday evening and all day Saturday kind of event, so kind of a shorter event. I don't see any questions. We got a few people with us, so I'll give them one more minute to see if they want to ask any questions. Father Pepe, anything you want to say and as a parting shot?
Say one more thing?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. I think one of the things that Ignatius has there a lot, especially in the first week, is how one of the ways in which we get this freedom to love is to transform three things of our inner lives. And he talks about memory, understanding, and will as three places that need kind of being touched by God. So our will is basically, what am I trying to get with all my striving? And that needs to be touched by saying, like, taking the long view of, like, I actually want love, but then our understanding, how I understand the world, how I understand myself, needs to be touched by God. If I understand myself as loved by God, being seen with mercy, a lot of things change. And ultimately, even my memory, I have things in my memory that need to be healed, that need to be touched by God too. And when those three get touched, I think a lot of kind of good fruit can come. So that's kind of at the core of the retreat. So,
Well, excellent.
Somebody said thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We're right up on about a half hour, so I think we'll end it there. We got a little thank you comment from Peggy McAuliffe, who is joining us online. We'll be back next month. Let me just find this real quick. We have another conversation scheduled on, it's a little bit earlier this time. It's on Thursday, June 20th at 10 a.m. So a little bit earlier. And we'll be with Jesuit Father Tucker Redding, who is currently the associate pastor at St. Francis Xavier College Church here in St. Louis. Do you know Father Tucker? Do you?
Yeah, he's great. He does a lot of work in media. Tell him I say hi. He's very inspiring. Yeah.
Good. Excellent. All right. Well, that's it for today then. And thank you all for joining. Father Pepe, thank you. And we'll see you soon. If you want to hold on just a minute, I'll say a few things to you after we go off the line here. All right. We'll see you all soon.